When you play the Game of Thrones,
Subscribe and like.
you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello guys, welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. Today's video, we are going to be doing Sansa II, A Clash of Kings. And I do want to make an announcement because this will be the last reread on the channel for this channel. The reread will not stop. The upload schedule will not really change at all. I'm just moving this series to another channel. I will have that linked in the description for you guys that love my rereads. Again, they're going to all be posted on there. I just felt like for the best interest of this channel and trying to continue to grow on this channel and also to not really confuse the algorithm and take more of my, I would say more of my passion projects and put it all together. And so it doesn't really get lost. Whereas like on this channel, it's very clear that the vast majority of my audience do not watch these videos. And so instead of it getting buried underneath the algorithm, which is not going to promote it at all, I'd rather just put it on its own channel, let it be its own thing. For you people that still enjoy it and you guys that still like it, and I'm going to continue to do it, and I will probably until I get to dance and I finish it, it will be over there. So again, that link will be in the description. I just want to let you guys know. So again, next week on Tuesday at the regular scheduled time, will not be on this channel. So if you want to continue watching these, it will be on that second channel. It will still be on Spotify. So the Spotify I've connected to this channel, it will still be on there. So don't worry about that. But I did want to put that out there. I kind of been going back and forth on how I wanted to manage this series. And I know the community was a little bit against me on this one, but I also had a lot of content creators that reached out that also thought it was a good idea. So I don't know. This is just kind of my decision. I'm going to go with it. I will say also the reread stuff on this channel, for the most part, will be probably taken down and just re-uploaded over there. So yeah, if you're looking for any of that content, it will be on that channel. Feel free to subscribe there. So let's get into Sansa II, A Clash of Kings. And I did want to say with Sansa II, a very short chapter. Sansa is a character that she's kind of weird. Both Sansa 1 and 2 are quite short chapters. They very much feel like chapters that run to just fill in some gaps so we don't have 20 Tyrion chapters in this book. And so you kind of really feel that with like this one and also like the first one. Like the first one is almost just a introduction to Tyrion getting to King's Landing. And so you kind of feel a little bit of that here as we see some things like, a riot is happening and how Joffrey kind of goes about doing that. It's kind of to kind of go along with what's going on with the Tyrion plotline, the repercussions of certain things like not having food is doing to the public. So you have that part of it. And then you also do have Sansa's, I actually think, character stuff in this chapter, which is quite good. So getting into the chapter, we do start on page 211. Sansa found the mysterious note under her pillow, unsigned and in an unfamiliar hand. Now, right away with this note, as it tells her to come to the godswood tonight if you want to go home. Instantly, if I'm Sansa, this is very suspicious. It's not been signed. It's unclear. It could be very easily either a trap. It could be some sort of ambush. It could be somebody trying to kidnap or kill her or do other certain things I'm not going to say because YouTube doesn't like those kind of words. There's a lot of things here that kind of point to this idea that this is probably not safe. And we know that Sansa does actually go to the meeting, but it kind of goes against everything her mind's telling her. She almost gives in to the fairy tale part of what she has believed really since book 1. Now we're slowly peeling that back, right, with like Ned's death, but it's still there, right? She doesn't really grow out of those things until, hell, I mean, I guess book 4 maybe, and she's still growing even then. And so if you're Sansa, I really feel like, yes, you're looking for anyone to try and save you and bring you away from this place where you're being physically and mentally abused. But at the same time, it just seems a little too good. And that's going to be the case even when this meeting goes, in Sansa's opinion, quite well. She wondered if she should take it to the queen to prove her loyalty, but nervously she touched the fading bruise from Sir Meryn Trant, remembering how she had angered Joffrey by speaking against Janos Slynt. And there's a couple things here to note, right? Is Cersei still feels like she needs to gain the approval of Cersei and all of those things. She is someone that, are marking on being these bruisings, right? She got basically hit with a mailed fist. That's crazy. You think about how Sansa is at this age right now. she's, yes, kind of tall for her age, but she's still very, skinny. She's not somebody that can take a mailed punch, let alone just a punch in general, and you shouldn't be hitting women. So it really shows the way that Joffrey has, used and abused the character of Sansa and how it takes her out of it, right? It completely shows how the Lannisters have completely abused Sansa into the position that she's currently in. Prayed this was her chance to be saved, imagining noble knights like Sir Balon Swan, the Red Wine Twins, or Beric Dondarrion coming to her rescue. Again, this is a fantasy. The Red Wine Twins are just as much captives as she is. Beric Dondarrion hasn't been seen in the capital for a while, and he's, again, an outlaw at this point. Balon Swan, very unlikely. And so it's Sansa trying to rationalize some way that she can leave while it's still a fantasy. And I think that Sansa even realizes that herself. As something kind of creeps into her head, what if this was all a cruel trick, like Joffrey making her look at her father's head? And I think this is a very legitimate thing to be concerned about. It's something that Joffrey would do, this cruel idea of giving Sansa any hope that she can leave and then taking it from her and punishing her for it, showing that she is disloyal. And I do think that if I was in Sansa's position, I probably wouldn't go to this meeting, but we'll see kind of how that goes. Fear takes hold of Sansa. What if it was a trap and she would find Sir Ilyn Payne waiting with ice beneath the heart tree? The words repeated in her mind, offering both hope and terror. Come to the godswood tonight if you want to go home. Because on the flip side of this, if you're Sansa, what if this is truly somebody trying to help you? You may never get this opportunity ever again. You might not have an opportunity to go home, to be with your siblings and to be with eventually, your mother and all those things. What do you do? And so I think that's a really interesting part of this chapter, that you can understand why Sansa does go to the meeting, even though she is, I would feel like she's pushed to do so based on events that happen. As we get into page 212, the door opens, and Sansa hides the note under her sheet and sat on it. Her bedmaid, a mousy girl with limp brown hair, entered and asked if she wanted a bath. And instantly we're like, why does Sansa hide this letter so easily if this is just someone that's like a maid? And it makes it very apparent. Sansa even thinks about this in her last chapter in A Game of Thrones, that she can't trust these people, that they are likely lying to her or are spies. And so she kind of thinks about that here, where she's very suspicious of these people because, these servants are constantly being changed every single fortnight. She is not being able to make friends with any of these people, to, actually have some sort of connection. And so something like we kind of saw, in the show wouldn't even be possible here because those people are getting switched out so easily, right? We see like in season 2, Shay becomes a handmaiden or whatnot to Sansa, and that straight up would not be possible at this point of the story, just based upon the fact that those people are completely controlled by the Queen, Varys, Littlefinger, whoever you want to say. And so Sansa, not only is she isolated by, people like the Queen, Joffrey, all these other people that she doesn't like and doesn't like her in particularly, it's also that the simple people, right? The people that are your everyday interactions with the servants, they're not allowed to make connections with you. Think about what Arianne goes through after her kind of like failed coup in A Feast for Crows. That's basically Sansa's life every single day. You really think about that, and it makes you kind of change how you view the character of Sansa. You can understand why she'd be so angry and looks down on people, because she's being basically held as a prisoner, right? At sword point. Sansa does ask for a fire, even though she's shivering. She just doesn't seem to want these people around her, and you can understand that. But when the fire was lit, Sansa curtly dismissed the girl, convinced she was spying for the Queen or Varys, which she is definitely correct of. But once alone, she burned the note. She wants to get rid of the evidence. She doesn't want anybody to ever find this note or link it back to some sort of escape attempt. If she is caught, she could still have some reasonable, idea that, oh yeah, she's going to pray, right? But if this note is found on her or in her room, very different. It's the same reason Catelyn burns that letter in A Game of Thrones from her sister. Same idea here. She looked out the window and saw Sir Preston Greenfield pacing the drawbridge, knowing he would question her if she tried to leave. Relieved she had destroyed the note, she got into bed, but couldn't sleep. Thoughts of the message consumed her. And you can understand here with Sansa, the safe option, the more cautious approach tells you you should do this. But there's also that part of you that is saying, maybe this is an opportunity to leave. Maybe the girlish part of Sansa who thinks that some, fantasy great knight is going to sweep her off her feet, is going to come and save her. And I think that we all can think about sometime that, right, where our brain is telling us, this, but we don't maybe listen to it, or we have doubts about that, and that keeps you up. I'm somebody that does not like to do public speaking. I don't like, giving presentations or things like that. I know it's ironic given I'm making a YouTube video, but it's different when you're talking to a camera than talking to maybe like 50 people that are all staring at you and all that. It's kind of the same idea for me with like that. Like I always do not sleep well when I'm anxious for things like the next day. Like say it's starting a new job or it's, the beginning of classes and you don't know what to expect. I'm someone that's very anxious in terms of things like that. So I can definitely understand Sansa and what she's going through. Sansa longed for someone to guide her, and Miss Septa Mordain, screw Mordain, that's all I gotta say, and Jane Poole. And it's, I think Sansa, just wanting someone that she can talk to. She has nobody, right? Like, who can Sansa talk to? No one. But Sansa thinks how the Septa had been executed with the Stark household, and Jane had vanished, never spoken of again. Now, we know she's still alive, and she will be used, unfortunately, by Littlefinger and the really awful things that she's going to go through, but Sansa doesn't really know. And Sansa would also feel a lot of guilt because a lot of her actions led to someone like Jane Poole going down the fate that she will have. She tried not to dwell on them, but when the memories came, she struggled to hold back her tears. She feels alone. She feels guilt. She feels just isolated, right? That her whole world has collapsed into, maybe her bedroom. But getting into page 213, Sansa, even at this point, misses Arya. Now, the wording here is not the best. Sansa talking very nicely about Mordain and Jane, but then she words it like this: sometimes even missed Arya. That's not the best language. It's a lot of the reason people don't like Sansa. She does not have the same type of, I think, like, thinking about her sister that, like, Arya does. Like, Arya thinks about Sansa and pities her and wonders about her. Sansa, it very much feels like it's not something that she thinks about all that often. But she does, thinking about, playing and riding freely. She could only ride in circles in the Bailey, which had become dull. It's kind of similar to what Bran is going through. Bran used to be able to, go out of Winterfell and go into the woods, riding a dancer. But now, because of the dangers and perils, he's only kind of restricted to the castle. And Sansa, it's a different thing that's going on here, but it's kind of the same idea. It's feeling locked in. Riding doesn't feel all that great if you have no real freedom to go riding. Like, just being on a horse isn't gonna fill that need. Late at night, she heard distant shouting, growing louder, mixed with horses and pounding feet. It seems like something's going on. It can't be battle unless Stannis has just randomly started attacking King's Landing in the middle of the night, almost unannounced, and no scouts reported it. Or it's something going on within the city that's kind of like a uprising or people coming to the gates asking for food type situation. Looking outside, she saw men with spears and torches running along the walls, confirming what I just kind of basically said. She told herself to go back to bed, assuming it was just city troubles as people fled the war and turned to crime. And she's not wrong about that at all, but you think about what's slowly sinking in here. Sansa is realizing this is a good distraction. This is as good of time as any to try and sneak out and meet up at this, midnight meeting, because there won't be as many people that are just lingering about looking for people going to areas, right? Here, everybody's going to be worried about whatever's going on in the city, not on Sansa. But then she noticed that the White Knight was gone and the drawbridge was down but unguarded. Without thinking, she dressed, questioning her own actions as she saw torches along the walls. She kind of acts before really thinking. Because she might be thinking, or subconsciously anyway, that if she thinks about it too much, she might be too frightened to do it. And so we see her wondering about Stannis and Renly if they had arrived to claim the throne. She grabbed a gray cloak and hid a knife beneath it. Now, what's even more interesting is, what does Sansa know about Stannis and Renly at this time? Like, we know as an audience, through Tyrion and others, that Renly is slowly making his way to King's Landing, and Stannis, really, they don't know anything about. They know he's massing forces and things like that and has sent this letter, but They don't know when he plans to attack or where he tends to attack. Slipping out into the night, she waited for a column of red-cloaked Lannister swordmen to pass before crossing the undefended drawbridge. In the yard, she saw men arming themselves, including Sir Preston and 3 Kingsguard knights helping Joffrey into his armor. Even here, right, where Sansa, is in the wide open, if this was a different, circumstance, they would instantly probably recognize her, but because other things are going on, they're more preoccupied about the thing happening right now, this like gathering of people outside. They're not worried about Sansa at this point, or they're not worried about some random lady leaving in the middle of the night. They're just not all that worried about it. And so Sansa is able to escape them, and she's able to actually make it to this meeting. Now, her breath did, catch in her stomach, or her lungs, I should say, because, well, yeah, Joffrey is her main abuser. If he caught her here, she would be very much punished. Moving deeper into the castle, she feared looking back in case Joffrey was watching or following her. She climbed the serpentine steps, panting, then hid in a shadowy colonnade, I think is how you say that word, to catch her breath. A ragged black tomcat with its chewed-off ears startled her before spitting and leaping away. We see this black cat a lot. We saw this a couple times in the first book, notably with Arya, but at this point she reaches the godswood. She pulled her cloak tighter as the sounds of battle faded into the night. As we get into page 214, the air was rich with the scent of earth and leaves, making Sansa think of Lady, who would have liked this place. It's going to make her feel more like at home, right? Make her maybe feel like, her own godswood back at Winterfell. And so she kind of thinks of Lady. And you also think about Sansa, who, of all the Stark children, is the least Stark-like at this time. And there's a really nice parallel that George does, and that's because Lady isn't with Sansa. That Stark side of her isn't present within her. And so she's kind of being reminded of that, which is interesting as we kind of go towards, the old gods. It seems to give Sansa a bit of strength, even similar to someone like Daenerys with her dragon dreams in Book 1. Even in the castle's heart, the godswood felt wild, and the old gods seemed to watch with unseen eyes. She had always favored her mother's gods, the statues, stained glass, incense, and crystals, but she could not deny the godswood's quiet power, especially at night. Again, it just goes exactly into who Sansa is as a character. Sansa is somebody that cares more about the material things and the glammed up world. She doesn't care about things like, true power or the foreboding silence and the eyes looking down on her by the old gods. It's not as glamorous. It reflects a lot of what Sansa has favored in the world and her own beliefs and things like that. But to this time, she prayed for help, for a true knight to save her. And at this point, well, her prayer seems to be answered. Moving through the trees, she felt the bark's roughness and the brush of leaves on her cheeks, wondering if she was too late or if he had ever been there at all. When this point, a voice spoke from the shadows, startling her. Sir Dontos emerged, thick-necked and heavy-set, wearing a dark gray robe. And if you're Sansa, this is the opposite of what you want to see. Remember, Sansa just got done describing how she puts a lot of stock in how things look, right? And so a true knight, a true great knight, is going to look something more like Loras Tyrell in her eyes. Not someone like Dontos, the fool who shamed himself, who Sansa had to, basically rescue. Dontos? Really? The one that she, the lady, rescued? It's not how things usually work in the tales. Her heart sank. She recognized him by the blotchy skin and broken veins, realizing he was the one who had sent the note. He reached out, but she shrank back, her hand slipping to her hidden knife, demanding to know what he wanted. And if I was Sansa, I'd be thinking this as well. This older, kind of guy who seems to be somewhat of a coward and a drunk, gets you this letter in the middle of the night to come alone, basically, to, the godswood. I would also, feel on edge. I would feel like, is this guy trying to kidnap me? Like, what is he trying to do? Especially if I was younger. Think about, how old Sansa is. I would feel those feelings now. But at Sansa's age, I would feel even, more like, yeah, I'm getting my knife out. He claimed he only wished to help her as she had helped him. She accused him of being drunk, and he admitted to a single cup for courage, fearing severe punishment if caught. I'm going to say it. I don't know, if this works for some people. So whenever I have drank, I don't get like this courage thing. I know a lot of people like talk about that. I don't know if that's actually a thing for people or it's more of a psychological thing. I know like drinking can make you make decisions you don't necessarily think about it, so you kind of almost act without thinking. But I don't really have that. Like I don't know. Like I'm someone that I feel like alcohol does not affect me that way. Like alcohol affects me by making me very tired. I just want to go to sleep when I drink alcohol, but I don't know. Let me know. I guess with your drinking habits, do you also get this bit of courage that Dontos gets? Thinking of a lady who could sense falsehood but was gone because of Arya. Again, I want to point this out. I talked about this in Sansa 1 and her last chapter in Game of Thrones and all throughout it. Sansa still blames Arya for the death of her direwolf, not Joffrey. I think that's an insane thing to think about because Joffrey is somebody that's abusing her. I should say other people are abusing her, but Joffrey is the one giving those orders. And yet she still somehow villainizes Arya for those things. It just shows you that Sansa is a character that's very different than Arya. Arya is on one polar opposite where she takes everything to heart. She's somebody that has a lot of self-accountability and she even overdoes it. Right? Sansa's on the other spectrum of that. She is somebody that does not take a lot of accountability. She is somebody that likes to blame other people. And so you kind of see this here. George kind of slips it in, but don't worry, I caught it for you guys. Sansa drew her knife and held it before her. Dontos asked if she meant to stab him, and she swore she would unless he told her who sent him. He insisted no one had, swearing it on his honor as a knight. Not a very honorable knight, because we know that is not the case, but Sansa does hold those things to a very high extent. She scoffed at the word knight, reminding him that Joffrey had stripped him of that title, making lower than Moonboy. Sansa claps back, and some people might hate Sansa because of how she actually responds to Dontos. It's very, like, condescending and such. But personally, for a guy that basically made you come alone into the middle of the night, I don't mind it. She had prayed for a knight to save her. Why had the gods sent a drunken old fool instead? Well, because the gods didn't send him, and this is all planned by Littlefinger, but it begs the question. Dontos admitted she was right, but said that oddly, now that he was a fool, he might finally find it in himself to be a knight again. Or, let me propose a counter theory. Because of his loss of station and all these things, he's trying to get a little bit of money so that, he can have a decent life. Getting into page 215, Dontos told Sansa that she had saved him, not just from Joffrey, but from himself, praising her grace and courage. On the surface level, Sansa might believe that. That is not the case at all. Dontos did not save himself from anything. He referenced an old tale of a fool who was the greatest knight of all, and Sansa whispered, Florian, recognizing the story instantly. You can see like how Littlefinger almost preps Dontos for everything to gain her trust. Bring up this old tale that'll remind her of knights' heraldry and saving her and all those things. He humbly vowed to be her Florian, falling to his knees. Sansa felt weightless, torn between trusting a drunkard and fearing she would lose her only chance. If you're a Sansa, you're in a tough spot. Because, Sansa's still young, so she doesn't necessarily understand things like we do, but on one hand, Dontos is just not somebody that's trustworthy. He's a drunk. He's a fool. He's somebody that does not seem to have a lot of courage. There's not really a lot of reasons to, even if you trust him, that he's going to be able to carry out any of his promises. That's what I would be thinking if I was Sansa. But on the flip side of that, is anybody else going to step up to help you? And the answer is probably no. So maybe you take a shot in the dark. What's the worst that could happen to you? I mean, Sansa already, thinks about it would be better to die than to, be caught and be punished and all this other stuff. She's very kind of suicidal. And we talk about that in Sansa 1 as well. She is somebody that is not doing well mentally, and it's very understandable why. Sansa tries to investigate a little bit further. How would he get her away? And Dontos explained that escaping the castle was the hardest part, but once free, ships could take her home. Yeah, obviously, Dontos. A ship seems like the best route to getting to Winterfell, but that doesn't matter. How are you going to get her out of one of the most fortified castles in Westeros? And he has no answer for that. You're telling me you made this whole meeting and you didn't even come up with a smidge of a plan? Very suspicious. If I'm Sansa, I'm like, Huh, that's very suspicious. He took all this risk, but Yen has no plan. Okay. But he says that he needed time to gather coins and make arrangements as they both were watched closely. Sansa hoped they could leave that very night, but Dontos insisted they had to wait for the right moment. He nervously asked her to put away the knife, and she did, telling him to rise. And, if you're Sansa, you got to be thinking, I want to be out of here as soon as possible. But, of course, that's not going to be able to really happen. Dontos, unsteady, brushed dirt and leaves from his knees, confessing his shame at standing by while her father was killed. What was he gonna do? Like honestly, I think even people that with really good honor and things like that, what were they going to do realistically? It's the same argument of Jaime, watching as Ned's brother and father were killed. What was he going to do? Type situation. He admitted that he had never been a hero like Ryman Redwine, somebody we know not the most about, or Barristan Selmy, but once was a knight, and she had reminded him of what that meant. It sounds all a little too good. Something shouldn't be adding up if you're Sansa. Once again, he already used vowing on knighthood, but now he vows to the gods, her father's gods to be specific. He vowed to send her home. Sansa accepted, asking how she would know when to go. Another note, and Dontos refused, saying that the risk was too great, instructing her to meet him in the godswood as often as possible. Now you're going to start seeing Sansa where she doesn't know what that means. Should she come every night? Should she always be there? And that's the thing. It's it makes the most sense though, right? People aren't going to come snooping around after them when Sansa's just going to pray. So it's a very smart plan when you think about it. And it's all Littlefinger's plan, but, still. The Godwood was the only safe place. Nowhere else in the city was truly private. He warned her that in public he might mock or ignore her, and she must forgive him. It was all part of their act to stay alive, which is 100% true. Sansa understood and agreed, knowing that one misstep could mean their heads on the walls, like her father's. I will say for Dontos, it's very likely his head would be on a spike. But for Sansa, a little less likely. If anything, I think Sansa would just be tortured and still kept as a hostage. But she isn't wrong, right? It's still a very big step to trying to escape. Getting into page 216, Sir Dontos urged Sansa to be brave, strong, and above all, patient. She promised she would, but pleaded for him to act as soon as possible, admitting her fear. Dontos confessed he was afraid too, and told her to leave before she was missed. When she asked if he would accompany her, he said it was better if they were never seen together. Once again, very smart. You don't want people to draw that connection for the two. Before leaving, Sansa impulsively kissed his cheek and whispered, "My Florian," convinced the gods had answered her prayers. Sansa falls for it again. She believes she's in a fairy tale, and that this story is basically being reenacted. It's everything that she could have hoped for. Which means it's too good to be true. She rushed back through the castle, heart soaring with hope, repeating to herself that Dontos would take her home and keep her safe. She wanted it to be true. She needed it to be true. The legend of Florian and Jonquil filled her thoughts. Florian was homely too, though not as old as Dontos. As she hurried down the serpentine steps, a man suddenly emerged from the shadows, causing her to crash into him. Now, what I find so well done here from this actual chapter is the way that Sansa, she has this idealized version of what a knight should be. And she runs into two people that kind of go against that, right? You think about this character of Dontos, who was formerly a knight. He's no longer a knight, but he is somebody that had that title, and he's everything it would appear that a knight shouldn't be, right? He's not tall and handsome or good with a sword or courageous, all those things. He's something completely different. The Hound, somebody that also is not a knight. He doesn't like to be identified as a knight. He isn't that. But he is somebody that also, in a lot of ways, respects the vows of the knights more than the knights do. And so I love the way that George actually shows us two different interactions that Sansa's going to have and how she reacts very differently to both situations. She nearly fell, but he caught her wrist in a painful grip. She noticed it was the Hound. He gruffly warned her about the danger of tumbling down the steps, his laughter rough and unsettling. Sansa quickly begged his pardon and averted her eyes, but he had already seen her fear. Sansa is scared of the Hound. He's a scary-looking guy, and that's something that Sansa can't get over. She very much views appearances as being very important. He demanded to know where she had been, shaking her when she hesitated. She stammered that she had been in the godswood, praying for her father and for the king's safety. Now, it's not a bad lie, but it's not going to fool the Hound. The Hound is too clever for those things, and he knew it was a lie right away. He sneered at her, not believing a word, and studied her closely, commenting that she was growing into a woman, but still a foolish little bird. He mocked her love of knights and demanded she sing him a song about true knights and fair maidens. Again, he's basically mocking everything that just happened in this chapter. Yes, the Hound doesn't know anything about the meeting with Dontos, any of that stuff, but it's almost, again, going into that part of Sansa that might doubt Dontos. All of this is going to be fuel for that fire. Also, it just goes into how the Hound views knights. Terrified, Sansa whispered that she only liked true knights. You would think that'd be interesting because most knights that she's actually run into have been quite the opposite of that. They've, bullied her, been not courageous like Dontos, all these things. He scoffed at the idea of true knights, reminding her he was no knight, no lord, and asked if he needed to beat the lesson into her. Very harsh words from the Hound. Kind of just reflects who he is as a person. He's very unhappy with himself, everything around him. Also doesn't help that he's drunk, as he sways drunkenly, cursing that he had drunk too much wine. He asked if she liked wine, particularly rue wine, calling it dark as blood, all a man needs, or a woman. Again, this is really going to play into, I think, that this idea of Sansa and Sandor kissing that we're going to see later in the book, things like this, right? This is something that's going to stick with Sansa, right? That maybe the Hound desires her. He talks about having wine and women. Maybe that's why. Now, let's get into page 217. The Hound laughed bitterly, acknowledging his drunkenness, then ordered Sansa to come with him, calling her a little bird and saying that he would keep her safe for the king. He nudged her forward with surprising gentleness. Again, it kind of shows that the Hound has a fondness for her, even with his harsh words, as he followed her down the steps. As the Hound goes into silence, almost forgetting that she was even there. When they reached Maegor's holdfast, Sansa was startled to see Sir Boros Blunt standing guard. She instinctively shrank away from his gaze. He was the worst of the king's guard, ill-tempered, ugly, and cruel, and was used to beat her and things like that to carry out Joffrey's abuses. But the Hound reassured her with a sneer, comparing Boros to a toad. And the Hound looks down on this man. He is somebody that claims to be a knight, but here he is beating girls and being cruel and horrible, and he's not even skilled with a blade either. You can understand why the Hound looks down on people like him. Sir Boros being irritated by the Hound, calling him a sir, and only for Clegane to remind him harshly that he was no knight, just the king's dog. Blunt informed him that Joffrey had been looking for his dog earlier. It already shows you that the Hound is somebody that might be called the king's dog, but he isn't somebody that goes, whimpering on Joffrey's heels. He has a mind of his own, and his loyalty to Joffrey is not maybe as strong as others may seem to think. The Hound dismissed the concern, saying he had been drinking, and pointed out that it had been Sir Boros' turn to protect the king. Sir Boros then turned his attention to Sansa, questioning why she was out of her chambers so late. Sansa repeated the same lie, but maybe saying it a bit more confidently and better than she had to the Hound, saying she had gone to the godswood to pray for the king's safety. Clegane backed her up as well, adding that no one could sleep with all the noise. Again, it shows a fondness that the Hound gives for Sansa, that he's willing to cover up for her as well so she isn't beaten. It should be something that Sansa is thinking about. Sandor is helping me. He knows I'm lying, but yet he helps me along. Maybe this should be somebody I should trust more than somebody like, a Dontos or all these other people that look, more fair, but aren't actually true knights. Sir Boros explained that a riot had almost broken out at the gates. Rumors of feasting for Tyrik's wedding had led hungry mobs to demand food. Exactly what we talked about in Tyrion's last chapter. As food grows shorter, people become more desperate for food to fill their bellies and to keep their children alive. We learn that Joffrey had personally led a sortie to drive them away. The Hound's mouth twitched at the news. A brave boy, he said mockingly. Obviously, Joffrey leading attacks on his own people that are probably unarmed and just asking for food. Sansa silently thought, let us see how brave he is when he faces my brother. If Robb ever got his hands on Joffrey, boy, Joffrey would be toast. As they ascended the steps, Sansa hesitantly asked Clegane why he allowed people to call him a dog, but would not let anyone call him a knight. See, for Sansa, she thinks, wait, being called a dog is very demeaning. It's beneath being a human, whereas a knight is very, splendorous and all that. She just doesn't really get it. And so we get this great answer. This is probably my favorite moment of the chapter. One of my favorites from the Hound in this chapter, when he talks about his love for dogs and why he likes them more than knights. The Hound says that he preferred dogs to knights. He then told her the story of his grandfather, a kennel master at Casterly Rock, who had once saved Lord Tytos Lannister from a lioness. Now, I think this is very interesting, right? One of these lions and or lionesses attacking, the family that has lions on their banners. I very much believe that this is a foreshadowing moment for Lord Tywin dying to Tyrion, or if you want to go further in this, if you think about, Cersei's death, if that comes by the hand of Jaime, it would be very interesting, right? I think that's a really interesting point that I think it's overlooked. But the lioness had attacked Tytos' horse and would have killed him too, but the kennel master and his hounds had driven the beast off. The 3 dogs had died protecting Tytos. The kennel master lost a leg, and in return, House Lannister had rewarded him with a land and a tower house. Again, you protect a pretty big lord, you're gonna get rewarded. And so that's where the sigil actually comes from House Clegane, these basically 3 dogs that died. As Sandor kind of notes their sigil with 3 black dogs on a yellow field, Clegane concluded grimly, a hound will die for you, but never lie to you, and he'll look you straight in the face. Now, as someone that's never owned a dog, I've had family members that have had dogs, friends that have dogs. I had cats when I was a bit younger. I shouldn't say a bit younger, but I mean, they both passed away within the last 2 or 3 years. One thing about dogs is they are very loyal to you. If you're somebody that treats them right, feeds them, takes them on walks, they're very loving to you, usually. That's not always the case. And so I can completely understand that, right? There's so many people that, I think genuinely love their dogs more than people because their dogs give them comfort, give them love. They're named man's best friend for a reason. And so people can hurt you. You can fall out of friendship. You can break up. You can get divorced. You can have struggles with coworkers. People can lie to you, cheat you, deceive you. But a dog will never do that, right? And so I really think that that's a really good analogy for the way that Sandor kind of feels in general, the way he's been treated his entire life by people in his own family. I thought that was a really good analogy and one of the stronger writing points of this chapter. But the Hound then, in page 218, suddenly grabbed Sansa by the jaw, lifting her chin roughly. His fingers dug into her skin, causing her pain. He sneered, pointing out that unlike a hound, little birds couldn't look people in the eye. Once again, he's just playing up this idea, right? That Sansa can't look at the Hound, even though the Hound is saving her. He's done it multiple times now. And yet, Sansa still can't look at him. It's weird when you think about his analogy, people around Sansa have only mistreated her. And yet she still looks to people, not someone like the Hound. It's this really interesting tale because we just got done talking about Florian and Jonquil and Sansa believing that that's someone, like a character of Dontos. But when you think about the end of this story and this book, the Hound is going to offer to take Sansa from here and she's going to deny him. It's going to be a really good learning point that's going to pay off in book 3. But I do enjoy, even though I know this chapter is lower in pages, and especially in this book where almost every chapter is, at least in my big book version anyway, is 12 to 20 pages. This chapter is almost half the length of a lot of the videos that we've done. You even think about the recording time. This is going to only be about a 42-minute video. After I cut it down, it'll probably be even less than that. All the videos in the past that I've done have been almost 50 minutes long or higher. So that's why it's going to be a little bit lower on my chapter rankings, but there's just some really great stuff here that George does in a very few amount of pages. He reminded her that she never sung him a song. Nervously, Sansa ordered to sing about Florian and Jonquil. The Hound scoffed at the idea, calling Florian a fool and Jonquil a C word. YouTube doesn't like that word, so we're not going to say it. Dismissing the story with disgust. Again, he's trashing on this idea that Sansa's building in her mind about Dontos. He then warned her ominously, "One day I'll have a song from you, whether you will it or no," once again highlighting what we're going to see at the very end of this book. This chapter does a very good job of establishing really the last meeting that Sansa and the Hound will have. Desperate to placate him, Sansa promised to sing gladly. Sandor snorted at her attempt, calling her pretty but a bad liar. He claimed that a dog could smell a lie and that she was surrounded by them in the Red Keep. And he ends off the chapter with, "And everyone better than you," he added darkly. Now, one of the biggest tragedies I think the show did was they actually took this line from Sandor and gave it to Littlefinger. And I understand why, but I think it's such a powerful line for the Hound, because the Hound is the real person trying to open, Sansa's eyes to the real world. And when you come at this point where Sansa is lying about whatever she was doing in the Godswood, the Hound doesn't know. It's him trying to tell her, if you're going to do these things, if you're going to lie, you're going to try to get out of King's Landing, you need to be able to hide your emotions and be able to tell your lies much better. It's something that Arya is really doing almost completely, masking her emotions, only showing the emotions she wants people to see. It's kind of something that the Hound is trying to tell to Sansa here. And so I think a really strong end of the chapter. I think that if this chapter didn't have the Hound in this last part of it, really would have hurt, I think, the quality of the chapter. But the Hound comes in and has a fantastic moment. He really strikes me almost like a Maester Aemon character, where we don't get a ton of him, but when we do, it's a highlight of that chapter. It instantly enhances whether it's a Sansa or a Jon chapter. And so really love the ending of this one. But I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.